Premier, can I ask you a question about Emergency Management Victoria Commissioner Andrew Crisp?
Yes.
This is not to do with the Coates inquiry. It's to do with evidence he gave on the 26th of August to the parliamentary inquiry.
Yes.
And in evidence there, he said 3 times that he briefed the police minister on the day the decision was taken about hotel quarantine on the 27th of March, and then later on the 28th of March. He said 3 times he had briefed her. This week he has recanted that evidence and said that over that 2-day period he did not brief her. However, he's a very unusual public servant in that he has a head of power under the Emergency Management Act that's different than anyone else, and he's required under that Act, Section 32, to continually brief his minister. I find it extraordinary that he did not now brief his minister in those 2 days, given Victoria on the 16th of March went into a state of emergency. He also has serious obligations under that same Act, I think it's Section 29, where if there is a neglect of his duty, he should be stood down, suspended, or removed from his post. Now, that's not awaiting the evidence out of the Coates inquiry. That's his own admitted evidence this week to contradict or now recant evidence in a parliamentary inquiry. So will he be stood down?
No, he won't be stood down. I have confidence in Andrew Crisp. Victorians know Andrew Crisp is someone of integrity, someone who showed all of us very clearly last summer and through a career, whether it be as a Special Operations Group police officer, all the way through to a member of Victoria Police Command, and in the EMV role that he's played since, he's shown Victorians what he's made of, and I don't accept many of the conclusions and the characterisation that you've just made. I'm not quibbling with you in terms of the Act, but if you want a further explanation about statements that he's made, these are not statements I've made. The statements that he's made.
No, but you administer this Act.
Yeah, indeed.
You administer this Act, and the Act says he must brief his minister. He now says he didn't brief his minister.
Yeah.
And Victoria was in a state of emergency. You would expect in a state of emergency that the minister would be briefed. He now says he did not brief her, and there are provisions in the Act if he doesn't adhere to the requirements of the Act, including briefing ministers, that he should be suspended and his commission terminated. Why would he not at least be investigated?
I think I've just answered that for you. In terms of the statements that he's made, then you'd need to speak to him about what he has said to a parliamentary inquiry. I've had no involvement whatsoever in either the evidence he gave or the presentation he gave to that parliamentary committee, or his consideration of the transcript, and therefore any further comments that he's made. You're asking me whether he retains my confidence, and my answer is yes.
No, I'm not asking you that with respect. I'm asking you that against the Act that you administer, it would appear he is in breach of the Act.
Well, I don't see it in those terms, and therefore it becomes a matter of confidence, and I have confidence in him, and I can't add much more than that. There are provisions. To see him as a public servant is curious in some respects. He is a statutory officer in many ways.
Well, no, legally he's a statutory officer.
That's right. He takes his responsibilities very seriously. He administers them with a degree of professionalism that I think is well known and well understood to the Victorian community. I really don't have much more to add beyond that. His statements, he's made those statements. They're not statements that are made by me. And if you want further detail, further information about what he said and why he said it, then he'd be the person to speak to. I certainly haven't had a communication with him about these matters. I probably can't be any clearer than to again say to you, he retains my confidence, and I think he retains the confidence of the vast majority of Victorians who know and see the job that he does and the person that he is, relevant or particularly helpful.
Premier, I just want to go back though to the point you made, and I confirm as well, that he's a statutory officer.
Yes.
That gives him a different legal foundation to his work. It's not merely just a matter like with your departmental secretary that you maintain confidence or not. He has very clear specific legal obligations.
Yes.
Those include briefing his minister. Victoria at the time was in a state of emergency. The apparatus of hotel quarantine was being set up over those 2 days. He had said in a parliamentary inquiry on 3 occasions that he did brief the minister on 27, 28 of March. He has now completely recanted that evidence and said he did not brief the minister. Now, if he is required under law in the Act, not a matter of confidence, a matter of law, that he has to brief the minister, he now says of his own volition he did not brief the minister. In the very same Act, there are clear powers to suspend or remove an individual in that role who has a neglect of duty. Now, we've heard so many times people say these are extraordinary times in Victoria. It was inside the state of emergency time. It would be a case of neglect of duty, wouldn't it, under law, if he didn't brief the minister? Or are you saying that his original evidence back on the 26th of August when he did brief it is in fact the truth?
No, it's not a matter for me to be offering opinions. He's provided evidence. He's reviewed the transcript, and that's the way parliamentary committees work. They provide you with what the draft Hansard of what you've said. If you want to make any corrections based on, in fact, for instance, or if you wanted to clarify matters, then that's open to you to do that. I think you're drawing a conclusion and you're making a judgment that he has been neglectful, and I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that's the case at all. And the obligation that you point to is one of many different obligations that he has under that Act and under the operating procedures and processes of his office.
I've got the Act here and I've gone through it very carefully. I also note that he recanted his evidence after Lisa Neville said that she was not briefed in evidence to the Court inquiry on those 2 days. Before Lisa Neville's evidence to the Court inquiry, he said to a parliamentary inquiry in August that in fact he did brief her. Now, he had an opportunity to correct the Hansard on the parliamentary inquiry within the 24 hours that the Hansard was provided to him.
Yes.
But 6 weeks later, he corrects his evidence to the parliamentary inquiry, but only after the police minister says she was not briefed.
I'm well aware of the sequence. What I'd say to you is I can't speak to that. Only Emergency Management Commissioner Crisp can speak to that. And I'm sure that if you've got questions that you want to put to him, then he'll look at those questions and he'll provide you with answers. I've not had a discussion with him about these matters. I'm in no way involved in any of these matters. He has sought to correct the record, and he obviously has made a judgment that he believes that's an important thing to do. He's done it. It's not something he spoke to me about. I'm trying to be as respectful as I can. I can't offer any more than that. What I won't be doing, though, is drawing some of those ultimate conclusions that you've put to me. I don't think that's fair. But as to... brief
from your department or the Department of Justice as to whether, now that he has admitted he did not brief the police minister in those 2 critical days when Victoria was under a state of emergency, have you sought a brief from any department that reports through to you as to whether he has met the requirements of the Act?
No, I've not asked that specific question. No. I think we're all rather focused on getting on and getting the job done. But again, if you want to know more about what prompted him to make those statements, then the only person that you can speak to is him, because he's the one that's...
I'm not interested in Mr. Crisp, Premier. I'm actually interested in...
I'm rather interested in him getting on and doing his job, which I'm confident he's doing.
I'm interested in his administration of the responsibilities under this Act as a statutory officer.
Well, you seem to have drawn some conclusions about whether he has or hasn't done that. I'm simply saying to you as politely as I can, I don't draw the same conclusion. You've asked me a direct question about have I spent considerable time over the last few days asking my department to look into this matter, and the answer clearly, no, I haven't. We're rather focused on many other matters, and that is directly the product of the fact that he's made a judgment. I believe him to be a person of absolute integrity. He's made a judgment that he needed to correct the record. He's done that. He didn't seek permission. He didn't didn't ask for help, he didn't discuss it with me. That's not a matter that I am in any way involved in. Do I have confidence in him? Yes, I do. That is my position.
Just one
Sure.
more question from me. Because of the constraints of the Federal Telecommunications Interception Act and the inquiry being able to obtain complete and full phone records, we know that the issue, and it's included again in Graham Ashton's submission today in closing statement to the inquiry, the code inquiry, it pertains to an incoming call to Graham Ashton, as he says, in that 6-minute period. Given the constraint of getting the incoming calls, for the avoidance of doubt, are you, Chris Eccles, and indeed your Chief of Staff, prepared to provide your outgoing calls in that 6-minute period, which would be freely available to you from Telstra, freely available in your own personal records? That information has not yet been provided to the inquiry. Would you be happy to provide that to the inquiry?
We've been happy all along. If the inquiry sought information from us, from any Victorian, then the answer should be yes.
Would you be happy to provide it anyway, whether they ask for it or not? I mean, it goes to the heart of the question of who called Ashton in that 6-minute period.
I would have thought that we'd well and truly established, if not from today's press conference, but from many that I've done in recent times, that the inquiry is independent. The Inquiries Act makes that. That's not a matter of opinion, that is a matter of fact. And I'm not going to get into, if you like, telling the inquiry what they should seek, what they should call for, what they should find. They are, having looked at nearly 300,000 pages, having heard from witnesses from, far and wide, I'm confident that if they believe there is a deficiency or an incompleteness in terms of the picture that they are working with, it is within their power to raise those matters.
It is not in their power. Let me be very clear.
No, you don't.
The inquiry that you have established, led by Jennifer Coate, under the Victorian Inquiries Act, does not have the power to request from you or your Chief of Staff or Mr Eccles phone records. That is only under the Federal Telecommunications Interception Act. It is not a power or an ability open to Justice Coate. But you, as an individual, your Chief of Staff and Mr Eccles can willingly provide that information now and completely clear up this 6-minute period that has been, I think, the subject of a lot of debate and conjecture. You could clear that up tomorrow with your own free provision of records available to you now.
I understand the point that you're making, but the point you're making seems to miss, I think, a really key element here. I've given evidence. Mr Ashton's given evidence. There's no federal or state prohibition on people being asked a question. In fact, they're obliged, regardless of which Parliament passed the law, to answer fully.
Premier.
Yeah, but he could have been asked about those matters. I'm not the one doing the asking.
Excuse me, Premier, but in his evidence again today in the submission and closing arguments, when Mr Ashton is asked, he does say that someone called him with that decision. Someone called him. He can't recall who it is. But
there you go. So, again...
No, please. He's a former police commissioner who clearly says he had a call in that period of time. He cannot remember the name, but he says it was an individual. He puts it again in writing into the submission. Now, if his record kind of
going around in circles here. What I'm saying to you is,
if his record of incoming calls could be obtained, we would be able to tell who called him. If you, your Chief of Staff or Mr Eccles provided your phone records at that time, and if you did not call Mr Ashton, this whole matter would be cleared up.
Well, and with the greatest of respect, if you're putting it to me that somehow you've got the power to make a request of me, but that the board doesn't, that's just not right. If the board requires that information or any other information, again, with the greatest of respect, they can seek that from anyone they choose. If that person was then to say, well, no, I'm not going to do that because there's a clear line between the authority of the state versus the Commonwealth when it comes to these matters, well, then that would be an argument free for them to make. But with the greatest of respect, I don't agree with the notion that somehow you and your network have an ability to put something to me and make a request of me, but the Board of Inquiry doesn't. The Board has that power. The Board has that. No, and I'm answering your question, and they've been lengthy questions, and I'm not in the business of speaking over people, and I'm not going to start doing that now. But if you just let me complete the answer. The Board, in my judgment, has the powers it needs. They've not sought any additional powers. They've not highlighted to me or anyone else that I'm aware of any deficiencies or gaps in their terms of reference or in the powers and functions, the abilities that they have. It is free for them to seek further information from anyone. They've not done that. But I am confident that if they believe this matter to be critical, if they believe this matter to be of interest to them even, not necessarily importance, those judgments are not for me to make. They would make that judgment. They'd make a request. No such request has been made, not to me. So
I'm not suggesting, or please don't infer, that I am demanding you put those records out. My question to you is, very clearly again today, in the Victoria Police submission, they say there is not the powers available to this inquiry in Victoria, as does the Inquiry Act, as does the terms of reference that you establish this inquiry under. None of those powers in the state of Victoria can access federal telecommunications held phone records.
No, that's not a point of argument.
Please, I've finished the question, and my point to you is, you can freely provide your outgoing calls, as Mr. Ashton did to the inquiry. No one else, a party to giving evidence, yourself, Lisa Neville, Chris Eccles, no one else has provided the level of phone record information as Graham Ashton has. If you were to provide your outgoing calls, the clarification in relation to then the incoming calls to Mr. Ashton's phone would be very clear. Now, the Commissioner cannot, Justice Coate, can't require you to do that, because she cannot
but
use
she's not
a
even
federal
asked.
warrant.
She's
she
not
has
even
no
asked.
power.
She's not even asked, which is a point that I think seems to be missing here.
But why wouldn't you
If
just
she
provide
makes,
it anyway?
well, because frankly, the inquiry, the Board are conducting this inquiry. They're doing that work, and if they want to make a request of me, then they're free. They are free to do so.
Would you exceed the request?
They are
Would you
free.
do it?
Well, this is the point that I was making earlier on. All requests that have been made by the Independent Board of Inquiry have been agreed to, whether that be an additional funding, my completing a witness statement, which is a Q&A. It's basically a series of questions get put to me. Did all that. Please, could you come along and appear and answer all questions? Yes, I did that. I think I've well and truly demonstrated my faith in this process and my willingness to be a part of it. I established the inquiry after all. So again, if a request were made, then of course, on our form, and I'll confirm for you right now, of course we would provide and be cooperative in any way we possibly could. In any way we possibly could.
For all the parties who haven't provided them to date.
If requests were made, but that's for the Board. That's for the Board to determine whether they want that information or any other information. But I wouldn't want anyone to draw from any of our discussion today the notion that things have been sought and have not been handed up, because that would be absolutely inaccurate. Any and all matters that they've sought, including additional funding, have been provided, and that won't change. We're all of us should be and are fully cooperating in a process that we set up. The alternative, of course, would be to mark your own work. That I don't think that was appropriate. That's why we set up the Independent Board of Inquiry. It's why they're doing their work. It's why they'll report in due course.